Yes.
Okay. So we're continuing our talks on Mahavir philosophy, Jain philosophy. There is a lot to learn and a lot to understand, and more important than a lot to assimilate in your daily life. Until you really take a step into assimilation, all this knowledge and all this so-called stuff you find in the books and all that has no value. Uh, it's almost like seeing a picture and not actually going to places, reading the map and not actually being there, seeing a Grand Canyon in the picture and going there in person. So it is a vast difference. So the topic of that we're talking about is do you really want to be a Jain? Jain philosophies and all that, they're beautiful, but the way the Jain religions have been kind of guided into the direction of scriptures and more exhaustive scriptures and then commentaries on scriptures and then commentaries on commentaries, and it's been going on for thousands of years, and if you really start studying them and you will never be able to finish in this life for sure, and maybe another 2 or 3 lives before you can catch up on all those things. And even after all that, the question is, would you reach anywhere? And that's my question. Do you really want to be a Jain? If you are a Jain, you already are biased because you consider yourself a Jain. Mahavir is your card, and that's the end of that. And believe me, it's true for all religions. I have nothing against Jainism or Hinduism or Muslim or Judaism or whatever. It doesn't matter. The matter is that whatever Mahavir realized was in a formless state. It was a state which was beyond the senses. So senses are the limiting factor. Whatever I can touch, I can make you touch and we can share the experience. But whatever I thought, maybe I can describe in the words. Maybe what you thought, you can describe in your words. Maybe I can understand if your words and my words are the same language. Different language, then hands down, we cannot understand each other. Maybe gestures, this and that. But there is a crisscross possible only at 5 senses level. But whatever was experienced was beyond the senses. How do you explain to people? And that's where the problem comes in. First 500 years, Mahavir, any scriptures did not come out of Jainism at all. In fact, Mahavir, like I said last time, the written language was available at the time when Mahavir was around, but he chose not to put in the books. And there was a good reason for it, because he wanted to communicate directly. He lived up to age 80 almost, and he went from villages to villages to villages to bring out the sermons reflecting whatever his inner state of existence was. He was beyond the mind, beyond the senses. He had transcended all the karmas and everything. But and of course, whatever he spoke was, even that was 1% of what he had to offer, because there was no other way. So speaking directly to someone is one of the most effective ways out of all the senses. But writing books is totally useless. And like Vijay said last time, that at least it gives you a pointer in the right direction, maybe. But at the same time, there is a lot of abuses possible, because once a scripture is written, then it becomes a doctrine. Then people start worshipping the scriptures, and then they put them at much higher level, and they keep on praying and they keep on worshipping, and Kanku, Chandla, all those things happen, and then real actual change of behavior, the actual transformation that has to take from within, never comes. And it just goes on from generations to generations. That's how the religions are started, and that's how the fights start, and then all these pundits and also so-called intellectuals come into the picture, and they say, well, we know this and we know this, and you don't know this and you don't know that. The whole purpose of writing the scriptures, written by, even if there was an enlightened person, was written to unite everybody, now becomes a factor to divide everybody. And maybe Mahavir sensed all these things, and he decided not to write the books. So reading the scripture is one of the most boring and one of the most flat and ineffective method of reaching to Mahavir. And our job is to reach to Mahavir what he actually did, what his mental makeup must have been, what he must have felt, why he reached to those conclusions that non-violence is the best dharma. Why? What he must have. So it's almost like playing with a child. You love the child. What would you do? You will lie down on the floor with him, face to face. Whatever he's doing, you're going to do the same thing with him. Try to duplicate. Are you having the same pleasure that he must be having when he's playing? Try to understand what his needs are. So the next move comes in, you are ready for him. So that's how much what we call tadatmya. One evenness has to come. Then only you can understand Mahavir. And that is the goal of all these discussions that we're going to do in next several lectures. So once who becomes a reader of the scriptures, he loses the path. For him, scriptures becomes everything. It's almost like something that goes on for generations. You know, they had a story about those rubies, remember? In Calcutta. Maharaja of Vijayanagar was holding on to something really big. But when the Muslims invaded, he passed on his family treasures to one of his sister or something like that. And the best way to keep it from everybody was to make it as if it's a thing of worship. So after second, third, fourth generation, there was one guy who was an engineer in Calcutta, and it came to him that this is something we worship every day. That's it. So that way the thing remains untouched and unexplored. Nobody wants to open up the God's statue to find out what's inside, right? So that was the best way to get. So he kept on worshipping, but he had a little bit intellectual function, and he had a little bit knowledge of minerals and gems and things like that. He said, this doesn't look right, like a round piece of something, like a stone or something, and over the period of years had become dirty, and everything was on it because all the kanku and everything went in there. That's the real thing. So he took it to one of the mineralogists or something. They found out there were 4 pieces. These are the 4 biggest rubies in the world. The 4th one is bigger than all the rubies so far found ever. I mean, talk about the value of this. So now, ultimately, it ended up in the hands of the government. Government cannot afford. The price of this is totally beyond anybody's capacity. The whole government may have to be shut down to buy those rubies. At the same time, they cannot allow it to, because it's a national monument or national heirloom or owners. So they will not. So at one time, now that his son, he's a doctor in Washington. He was doing a residency when they found it's a true story, and they tried to put it in Sotheby's for the auction. It didn't, and the efforts were blocked, and then they would not allow the rubies to be exported out. And at the same time, so the guy is having one of the most important treasures of life, and he cannot do anything about it. So I'm just telling the story because the rituals become just rituals, and they lose their original value and original luster. And that's where we really have to wake up and ask ourselves. There was also a story of an old man. He had some problem with his teeth. So every time he would eat, at the end of, he would finish his dinner, he will go into one of the corners of the house and had kept, toothpicks were not there at that, but he had some kind of stick. Then he would clean and then put it back, right? So his children, when they were growing up, they always watched that dad always did something like this. And it went on till dad became old and he lost his teeth, but that toothpick kind of thing just stayed there. And once dad died, of course, kids loved their dad, so they had a lot of reverence for whatever he did, whatever he wore, wherever he went, and everything. It becomes a reverent thing. So they went into that corner and found out there was a piece of wood or something like that. So they said, wow. And they never asked dad, and dad never told them what. So now it loses its original purpose, and now it becomes a thing of worship. So then they realized that we have to honor dad. What maybe we don't understand, but at least this is our respect. So they made exact replica made out of gold, and they put it on a pedestal and then started worshipping. After third or fourth generations, and of course the family became very rich, and they created a temple around it, all from a toothpick. It's a story, but that's exactly what has happened. Principles of ahimsa, principle of non-violence, principles of all those things that Mahavir had brought out has just remained principles. Nobody has actually tried to put it in their daily life. So that's why we are here, to understand each and every principle into the details and how it actually feels to be non-violent inside. In fact, how does it feel to be speaking truth all the time? What happens when you lie? What happens when you steal? All those are inner percussions which are happening, and I want you to sense those things, and I want you to feel those things, and then you decide whether should I lie or not. Then you decide should I be violent or not. And when you decide, then Mahavir is bypassed, but then you become Mahavir. Your actual action becomes like Mahavir. But at that time, that's the best justice you could have done to Mahavir, instead of worshipping him and then worshipping him and the rituals and all those things. So that's where our approach to Mahavir should be. So whatever Mahavir experienced, because it was beyond the senses and could not be put into the words, that's exactly happened. After 500 years, so whenever Mahavir reached enlightenment, and whatever he could offer could be offered only in silence. Not everyone was equipped to accept in silence. So some of them accepted in the verbal teachings of Mahavir. And they realized the importance of, many of them reached enlightenment. But there were some, they never got it. There are some who never get it. And after 500 years, they started writing the scriptures. So third or fourth generation who had never listened to Mahavir became the forebearers of Jainism. Just like those kids, worshipping the toothpick. So, and that's how where we are, and the agams and all those sutras, when everything was written, and maybe some were enlightened, some were not, all those things, but things became ridiculous. And then we keep on doing it if we consider ourselves a Jain. If we don't consider ourselves a Jain and have an independent look to the whole thing, maybe we can understand the details of it. So whether you call yourself a Jain, that's the most disservice you can do to Mahavir. Same way, if you consider yourself a Hindu, you are doing the most disservice to Krishna or Ram. And same thing for all the religions. So think before you call yourself a Jain. You don't want to be called a Jain until you become Jain. You really have to become Jain to be called a Jain. So it's not easy. If you think that you're born in a Jain family or a Hindu family and adopted that religion, hands down, that's the most foolish thing to do. It has not the way to adopt any religion. Religion is transformation. That transformation has to happen within, otherwise you are nowhere. So internal realization is where everything that happened to Mahavir did happen. It was the flame that sparked in a lamp called Vardhaman, and that made him Mahavir. Flame is a representative of conversion of the form to formless, manifest to unmanifest. So unmanifest is we are trying to talk about. Unmanifest cannot be talked about, cannot be spoken, cannot be explained. It has to be internally realized, and we have to be ready for that. And even earthly things, like you have love for somebody, how do you write it down? How do you feel it? You say you love someone, whatever. Speaking is easy, but an internal feeling, the bhav that you have about love, how do you explain to someone? You just feel it inside. So those are the qualities. They are coming from way beyond. Love, karuna, sympathy, all these things you cannot just put down in a simple words and then make it real. Yet you can say those words and not mean it. And what you mean it, you may not be able to speak out in the words. So these are all internal feelings. It's a bhav state that we're dealing with. So even within the senses that we have, for example, we have a problem. Say there is a beautiful scene happening in front of you. A girl is running to meet her lover. There are beautiful clouds in the sky, little drizzling of the rain. She has a gungar in her feet. She's running to meet her friend, and everything is alive, and the peacocks are cooing, and there are two people watching the whole thing. One who has all the five senses, and one person is deaf. He cannot hear the peacocks, he cannot hear the thunders, he cannot hear the clouds, he cannot hear the drizzling of the rain. Tell both to paint a picture, a painting. Both the paintings will be the same. He will paint exactly the same as the person who has all the five senses. For him, gungru is gungru, what it looks like. But the real value of gungur is when it functions, when it creates the rankar, the resonance that fills the whole atmosphere. That's where the value of gungru is. So even within the senses, to exchange the experience of one sense to another becomes impossible. Then talk about sharing the experience of God. Sharing the experience of something that is beyond the senses, hands down, it's not possible. And yet Mahavir tried, out of compassion, out of karuna. Mahavir was enlightened in his previous life, but he chose to come back. And they say you have one choice that you can exercise to come back in the life. So he was already enlightened, but he came into this life out of karuna, to give out the sermons, to show the path to the people. And that path we have to catch. So he also has a problem, because he cannot express what he feels like inside. He sees the suffering all around. People fighting for petty things, people lying, people cheating their wives, people cheating their husbands, stealing money, this and that, people crying because of their loved ones' loss. All these things he knows, these are not necessary at all. In the plane where he comes out from, at that level, there is no suffering. It's very easy for him to see where the problems are. But the people who are actually suffering, they cannot understand that. What can he do? All he can do is he can offer his karuna. All he can do is show the path. But as far as coming out of this suffering, they have to do it. His hands are also tied. There is a famous story about a Buddha. One morning he came for a sermon. He brings a beautiful flower with him. Then he sits and he does not speak. 5 minutes, 10 minutes passes by. Then all of a sudden, one of his students called Mahakashyap starts laughing. He's full of laughter. Nobody gets it. Buddha has not spoken a single word. So turns out to be Buddha also smiled, and he gave the flower to Mahakashyap. And then the sermon started. At the end of the sermon, Buddha said, whatever could not be spoken in the words, I gave it to Mahakashyap. Whatever can be put in words, I give it to you all. The connection was possible between Mahakashyap and Buddha because he had risen himself to that level that he could communicate with Buddha in a thoughtless state. So there are a lot of things which are possible only if we prime ourselves to that. So every single teaching of Mahavir, if it's captured at that level, maybe not at his level, but at least in a proper direction, instead of just looking at as words, we will learn a lot from Mahavir. Now, the knowledge that he had received in a thoughtless state, in an enlightened state, he disappeared. The person named Vardhaman disappeared. His ego disappeared. He had nothing to lose and nothing to gain from this world. There was nothing to hold. He had no possibility for sansar to give him anything that could make him happy. He was not lacking anything. He was happy in his steady state, where he had disappeared and had merged with total consciousness. No one could do anything for him. So at that level, the knowledge that he had acquired, even that knowledge he had no reason to hold on to. He would pass on this knowledge to everybody else without expecting anything in the return. So that is called true aparigraha. Do not hold on to anything. What happened to that knowledge? Knowledge went into the scriptures. Scriptures became the source of knowledge for a lot of people. And that knowledge became like a possession. That I know this and you don't know this. You want to learn this from me? Give me money or give me respect. Put me on a pedestal. Do this, do that for me. Knowledge became like a money, like a currency to exchange, ego versus ego. So a true knowledge that was received at a parigraha state became a parigraha for everybody. What an insult of a pristine state of existence, which is without giving and taking, it is just flowing, becomes corrupted in the hands of the people who are not enlightened. So the knowledge also became a currency. Now, money, on the contrary, was created for parigraha. There was no other purpose for money. Money was there, currency was created only for exchange of the goods. So if you use parigraha for money, to some extent you can understand that you need money for day-to-day life, because that was the primary purpose. But to kill the purpose of aparigraha, the pristine knowledge, is almost unheard of. If I want to give a lecture and expecting money in return, that's corruption of the true pristine knowledge. So there is a famous speaker and an author was called in to Arya Samaj to give a speech. He said he takes for $15,000. Indian guy, anybody's guess, but he won't come. Again, exchange of knowledge for money. That's how low you can get down to. So the scriptures don't have any life in it. Anything would be better than scriptures would be, like it's almost like texting to someone. That has no life versus you actually call a person and can exchange the ideas. Or even better, see a video of someone. Or even better, meet them in person. So all these levels have different experiences. That's why the books are getting out of favor, little by little by little. Nobody wants to read anymore. Now we have videos, so we can exchange each other's actual scenery that is happening. And the evolution goes out that way. That tells us that live experience is more important than dead. Books are dead, so and there is a lot of danger. And that probably was the reason Mahavir never wrote the books. So we're gonna close one aspect of this discussion and move on to the next aspect since we have time. So do not find or try to find Mahavir in the books. Do not try to find Mahavir in the rituals or rules, regulations. All these things are useless. You learn the principles, but put them in your inside lab. Your laboratory is inside. You find out the truth or the falsehood of each and every principles and adopt it only if you think is right. So these principles, you realize them, adopt them, like ahimsa should be springing out from within. Aparigraha should be springing out from within. Asteya, non-stealing, should be springing out from within. There was another beautiful principle we might talk down the road, is anekantvad. Anekantvad is a beautiful principle published, made popular by Mahavir, was anekantvad, meaning everything has millions of ways of expressing. So when a consciousness is coming out through different mediums, you and me and him and her and all that, it's going to express in zillions of different ways, but it's all one single consciousness. So, but it can end up in so many different ways. But again, knowing the principle, believing the principle within, will have a lot of respect for whether somebody's smart or not, somebody's tall or not, somebody's short or not, somebody can express themselves in words or not, doesn't matter. They are all expressions of consciousness. This is the most democratic religion you can think of, in a way, that has brought out this fact, if we can understand those principles and put it in a daily life. Sapekshvad was another one, which is the theory of relativity. Again, very popularized in a scriptural world, in a spiritual world by Mahavir, which is the theory of relativity after 2500 years actually put down in science by Einstein. So all these principles we will talk about down the road. So much for one topic. Let me switch to another topic. Can you stop that? We can just pause it, I think.